The smell of antiseptic still hung in the air when the tension first began to coil like a tight wire. The maternity ward was usually a place of hushed voices and cautious smiles, where exhaustion mixed with joy, but that morning it felt different. A young woman lay pale against white sheets, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as if it were safer than looking at the person standing at the foot of her bed. Her mother-in-law's posture was rigid, arms crossed, lips pressed so thin they nearly disappeared. There was no warmth in her gaze, only judgment sharpened by years of resentment she no longer bothered to hide. She spoke in a low, cutting voice, reminding everyone in the room that this child had come at the wrong time, that the family was unprepared, that mistakes had consequences. Nurses exchanged glances but said nothing. The young mother tried to sit up, wincing as pain rippled through her body, and asked quietly if they could talk later. The reply came immediately and cruelly. Later, she was told, would be too late. She should leave the hospital as soon as she was discharged and not expect help. You chose this road, the older woman said. Now walk it alone. The words landed like blows. The new mother felt her throat close, humiliation burning hotter than the physical ache in her body. She had imagined this moment differently, tentative reconciliation, perhaps even pride. Instead, she was being cast out at her most vulnerable, scolded as if she were a careless child rather than someone who had just brought new life into the world. The mother-in-law turned toward the door, already finished, already certain of her authority. That was when the door opened again. The sudden guest did not rush or raise his voice. He simply stepped inside, his presence filling the room in a way that demanded attention without effort. Conversation died instantly. The mother-in-law froze mid-step, her face draining of color as recognition hit her. She had not expected anyone else, least of all him. The man's eyes moved first to the young mother, softening, then to the older woman, hardening with a calm that felt more dangerous than anger. He asked one simple question: why? The explanation came out rushed and defensive, a tangle of excuses about family reputation, about responsibility, about doing what was best. He listened without interrupting, hands clasped behind his back, letting her talk herself into a corner. When she finally stopped, waiting for agreement, he shook his head slowly. He reminded her that strength was not measured by control, that abandoning someone at their weakest moment was not discipline but cruelty. His voice never rose, but each word landed with precision. Silence stretched. The mother-in-law opened her mouth to respond and found no words. For the first time, she seemed unsure of her place, unsure of the certainty that had carried her so confidently into the room minutes earlier. She stood there, speechless, confronted not just by another person but by the reflection of herself she had long avoided. Later, as the tension eased and nurses returned, the young mother felt something loosen inside her chest. The fear had not vanished, but it had shifted, making room for relief. The unexpected guest squeezed her hand gently, promising she was not alone, promising that support would come from places she might not expect. The mother-in-law left without another word, her heels clicking down the hallway like punctuation at the end of a sentence she could not revise. That same theme of pressure and confrontation played out far from the quiet hospital corridors, under the bright lights of a television studio where nothing was supposed to feel private. Eddie Murphy sat across from Michael Strahan on Good Morning America, the atmosphere polished and cheerful on the surface. The audience expected laughter, stories, nostalgia. For a while, that's what they got. Murphy joked easily, his timing effortless, the charm that had defined decades of performances still intact. But interviews have a way of shifting, and when the conversation turned toward personal boundaries and public expectations, the air changed. A question lingered a second too long, framed in a way that felt less curious and more accusatory. Murphy's smile tightened. He answered carefully at first, trying to steer the discussion back toward safer ground, but the follow-up came sharper, pressing him to explain himself in a way that suggested judgment rather than understanding. Viewers could see the calculation in his eyes. He had spent a lifetime navigating fame, learning when to deflect and when to engage. This time, he chose honesty. He spoke about respect, about how success did not give anyone the right to pry or provoke, about the exhaustion of being expected to perform even when the questions crossed a line. The studio felt suddenly smaller, the laughter gone. Strahan attempted to recover, but the moment had already tipped. Murphy's voice remained controlled, yet there was steel beneath it. He made it clear that he would not be boxed into a narrative or made to defend choices that were his alone. Then, with a brief nod that was both polite and final, he stood up. The cameras kept rolling as he thanked the crew and walked off set, leaving behind a stunned silence that no commercial break could immediately smooth over. The parallel between the two scenes was impossible to ignore. In both, someone was pushed beyond a boundary by another person convinced of their right to judge or control. In both, the response was not explosive rage but a decisive reclaiming of dignity. The young mother found it through unexpected support. Murphy claimed it by refusing to stay where respect had evaporated. Afterward, conversations erupted. Some criticized, others applauded. In the hospital, staff whispered about the confrontation, many quietly relieved that someone had finally spoken up. On social media, clips of Murphy's walk-off spread rapidly, sparking debates about interview ethics, celebrity autonomy, and the fine line between tough questions and disrespect. What lingered, though, was not the drama itself but the clarity it brought. Moments of confrontation strip away pretense. They reveal who believes power is something to wield over others and who understands it is the courage to stand firm. Whether in a maternity ward or a morning show studio, the message was the same: no one gets to decide your worth or your path when you refuse to surrender your voice. By the end of the day, the young mother slept more peacefully, her baby curled against her chest, while somewhere across the city, Eddie Murphy moved on to his next commitment, unbothered by the noise left behind. Different lives, different stages, but the same quiet victory, walking away from judgment and choosing self-respect instead. The corridor outside the maternity ward echoed with hurried footsteps and the low murmur of voices, but inside the room time seemed suspended. The young woman lay still, one hand resting protectively on the blanket that covered her newborn, her body aching in ways she had never known before. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her eyelids, yet sleep would not come. She could feel the tension in the room like a thick fog, growing heavier with every passing second. Her mother-in-law stood near the window, back straight, chin lifted, as if she were a judge rather than a visitor. The words came suddenly, sharp and unfiltered. There was no gentle preface, no attempt at softness. The older woman declared that this situation was unacceptable, that the birth had complicated everything, that the family's plans were now in ruins. She accused the young mother of being careless, irresponsible, and ungrateful. Each sentence felt rehearsed, as if she had been waiting weeks to unload them. Nurses paused in the doorway, uncertain whether to intervene or pretend they heard nothing. The young mother tried to respond, but her voice cracked. She said she was tired, that she needed rest, that this conversation could wait. The request only seemed to inflame the situation. Her mother-in-law scoffed, saying rest was a luxury she no longer deserved. She insisted that once the discharge papers were signed, the young woman should leave and not expect to return to the family home. "You're on your own now," she said coldly. "You chose this path. Don't drag us down with you." Tears welled up, not just from pain but from disbelief. This was supposed to be family. This was supposed to be support. Instead, she felt smaller than she ever had in her life. The newborn stirred, sensing distress, and the young mother focused on the tiny rise and fall of the baby's chest, clinging to that fragile rhythm as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the world. Then the door opened. The sound was soft, almost unremarkable, yet it changed everything. A man stepped inside, his presence calm but commanding. He took in the scene in an instant: the pale mother, the baby, the rigid figure by the window. Recognition flashed across the older woman's face, followed by shock so intense it robbed her of speech. She had not expected him, not here, not now. He walked closer to the bed, his expression gentle as he asked the young mother how she was feeling. That simple question, asked with genuine concern, nearly broke her. When he turned to the mother-in-law, his tone shifted, not angry, but firm. He asked why she thought this behavior was acceptable. She tried to explain, stumbling over her words, clinging to excuses about tradition, about honor, about teaching lessons. The more she spoke, the more hollow her justification sounded. He listened without interruption, then calmly dismantled every argument. He reminded her that family was not about control, that love did not come with conditions, and that abandoning someone at their weakest moment was not strength but failure. His words were measured, precise, leaving no room for denial. The mother-in-law opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For once, her authority meant nothing. She left the room quietly, her earlier confidence reduced to silence. The young mother felt a wave of relief wash over her, mixed with exhaustion. The unexpected guest stayed a while longer, assuring her she would have help, that she was not alone, that this moment did not define her future. When he finally left, the room felt lighter, as if a storm had passed. That same day, far from the hushed halls of the hospital, another confrontation unfolded under glaring studio lights. Eddie Murphy sat on the set of Good Morning America, relaxed at first, trading jokes and smiles with Michael Strahan. The atmosphere was bright, rehearsed, designed to feel friendly and effortless. Viewers tuned in expecting humor and nostalgia, and Murphy delivered, reminiscing about his career with easy charm. But as the interview progressed, the tone subtly shifted. Questions edged away from celebration and toward scrutiny. One particular line of questioning lingered on personal choices, framed in a way that felt less like curiosity and more like challenge. Murphy's expression changed almost imperceptibly. He answered politely, attempting to redirect, but the follow-up pressed harder, as if pushing him into a corner. There was a pause, brief but noticeable. Murphy leaned back, slightly, considering his response. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, but the humor was gone. He spoke about boundaries, about the difference between honest conversation and unnecessary provocation. He reminded the audience that entertainers were still human beings, not public property. The studio grew quiet, the usual rhythm of morning television disrupted. Strahan attempted to smooth things over, but the moment had already crossed a line. Murphy's gaze was steady as he made his point, refusing to soften it for the sake of comfort. Then, without drama, he stood up. He thanked the crew, nodded once, and walked off the set. The cameras captured the stunned reactions, the sudden emptiness of the chair where he had been sitting moments before. Clips of the walk-off spread rapidly online, sparking debates and divided opinions. Some praised Murphy for standing up for himself, while others criticized him for leaving. Yet beneath the noise was a simple truth: he had chosen self-respect over compliance. He refused to remain in a space where he felt diminished. The parallels between the two events were striking. In one, a vulnerable new mother was nearly crushed by judgment until an unexpected ally intervened. In the other, a seasoned performer asserted his dignity by removing himself from a disrespectful situation. Different settings, different stakes, but the same underlying lesson echoed through both stories. Power, it seemed, was not about who spoke the loudest or controlled the room. It was about knowing when to stand your ground and when to walk away. By the end of the day, the young mother slept with her child beside her, feeling a cautious hope for the future. Somewhere else, Eddie Murphy moved forward, unburdened by a moment that had already become a statement. Both moments reminded the world that silence can be broken, that boundaries can be defended, and that even in the face of judgment, dignity remains a choice no one else can take away.